Joining us now, Fox News commentator Alex Epstein. He wrote a book called Fossil Future. He talks a lot about fossil fuels, climate change, the need for oil and gas, and he is a strong critic of this pursuit of net zero. Alex, thanks for joining Middays.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Alex, I've read some of your book, and I've certainly seen you discuss it, seen you interviewed quite a bit. What's going on here?
What's going on with what in particular?
Well, we've got a president and many in his party and just a lot of other anti-fossil fuels people, high-profile people that just want to totally push us out of the fossil fuels business. We're not ready for that yet.
Well, there's really been this shockingly uniform commitment among governments, among corporations, among financial institutions, at least with the corporations and financial institutions in their rhetoric, that the number one goal of the world should be to be what's called net zero by 2050. That essentially means very little fossil fuel use. So we're rapidly eliminating fossil fuels, which provide 80% of the world's energy, which are currently still growing, in a world where most people have way too little energy by our standards. 3 billion people use less electricity than a typical American refrigerator. And so it should be really odd to people that this is happening, and we should really ask, why is it that our number one goal is eliminating CO2 emissions at all costs? And my view is the number one goal around the world should be making human life better, so what I call advancing human flourishing. And that's absolutely not consistent with eliminating CO2 emissions in the next 27 years. The far more important thing is to give more people more energy. And that's why I say we actually need more fossil fuels. Whatever warming the CO2 emissions cause, we can deal with that pretty easily insofar as there are negatives, but we can't deal with lack of energy.
Yeah, and, something that I've always thought is a bit at odds is this push, certainly from left-leaning economic policy, which I think hurts prosperity. Prosperity is the key to producing fuel, energy that we need for society, but doing it in a clean way. It seems like it's the more impoverished nations, the nations that are less wealthy, that tend to operate in a more dirty fashion.
Yeah, that's true. So, in general, prosperity makes everything better if you're really thinking of better from a human perspective, even climate. So when we're prosperous, we actually emit more CO2 emissions than when people are poor. But overall, life is far better, including cleaner, but also the climate is far safer because whatever changes occur in climate, which haven't been that significant thus far, our ability to deal with climate changes and climate danger is amazing. So, we used to have droughts kill millions of people a year frequently, and now the rate of drought-related deaths has gone down by 99% in the past 100 years, and a lot of it is because we use energy, specifically fossil fuels, to irrigate, to move crops from one place to another. So I really we're thinking of fossil fuels as something that ruined climate, and actually fossil fuels made us a lot safer from climate.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So when the president at his State of the Union address, when he made the comment, hey, I'm encouraging the energy companies to explore and produce more oil and gas, that we're going to need this stuff for at least another 10 years. What were your thoughts about that?
The 10 years is not an exciting time horizon there. You're gonna get destroyed in 10 years. Like, who wants to work in an industry that's going to be destroyed in 10 years? So I think it was kind of laughed at, but it was a real sign of his whole focus has been, as he put it in his campaign, I guarantee you we're going to end fossil fuels. So everything has been geared toward eliminating fossil fuels. But then what happened is we had an energy crisis, and so prices were going up, and so voters didn't like that, and so then he just made up this story that he hadn't done anything against fossil fuels, even though that had been a core campaign promise to rapidly eliminate them.
And so we see moves by the government. I think it's the EPA in particular recently that's making proposals down at the agency level in anticipation, expecting, pushing for half of the new cars sold in this country by 2030 to be EVs. They see that as kind of the prime producer of CO2 and that which has got to be changed. And then I believe 60-something percent, 64% by 2032. Is this tenable? Is this practical?
It's really a shockingly destructive idea. I mean, if EVs are so great, then let people buy them. Let producers be free to produce them without subsidies and let people be free to buy them and see what happens. And more power to them if they're actually cost effective for people. What we found is that even with huge subsidies, they're not cost effective for the typical person. They're about 6% of current sales. And so the idea, and we're already having grid problems with reliability due to the anti-fossil fuel policy. So what we're doing is we're saying let's force a technology that's not cost effective and places an enormous burden on a declining grid, so an enormous new demand for reliable electricity when we're decreasing the supply. I mean, what could go wrong? I live in California. We're already seeing it, even on a small scale, but California is nothing compared to what Biden is proposing in terms of destructiveness.
Right. So I believe I got that right. Isn't that the goal, 50% by 2030?
The number has been 67 by 2032. So basically 10 times more sales of this stuff. But it would be bad even if we had enough electricity, but we don't have enough electricity. So part of EVs competing on a free market should be people advocating for expanding our electric generation capacity, but instead they're advocating for it to decline and then putting way more demand and also, shutting down gas stoves. So you can be forgiven for having these conspiracy beliefs that people just want to control you because they're just putting everything on the grid and then making the grid totally impotent to actually provide electricity.
Yeah. But we don't seem to hear a lot of complaints about China, which produces way more CO2 than this country does, India.
Well, in a sense, yes. But so China is less per person.
Yeah.
But it's more total, but it's more people. I mean, China is bad in a lot of ways, but it makes sense that they're using fossil fuels. So it's just part of what's wrong about the situation is there's just this total blindness, this idea that, if we don't use as much fossil fuel and if we offshore manufacturing to China, which uses coal, then we're somehow, quote, doing something, versus recognizing, no, wait, fossil fuels are uniquely cost effective and, around the world. And so that's why China's using them. And if you actually want to substitute for or replace fossil fuels in the long term, you actually need to develop a superior replacement. You can't just punish Americans and then expect the rest of the world to follow suit. Should
we be including nuclear more robustly in our overall energy matrix?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as, for sure, nuclear has amazing potential. I think of it as it really needs to be liberated, or I often call it decriminalized, because it's just it's so difficult and costly to build. So you really need radical reform on the policy. I mean, my view is you always want to set things up so that we can have energy just like we have computers, right? Where we have a market where producers are free to produce the things they think are best, and then consumers can choose. Insofar as we have electricity markets, we want it to be so that I believe everyone should have to provide reliable electricity, and then the ones who can do it the best do it. But part of that is with nuclear, you need to change the regime that makes it almost impossible to build. Because right now, nuclear is just totally crippled by government.
I believe Germany just shut down their last reactor.
Yeah, so they're a real model of what not to do.
Right.
And yet they seem to be for years, when I was getting started on this issue, people were saying, "Oh, look at Germany, you're wrong. Look at Germany." Look, Germany is not going well. And now it's obviously not going well, but they haven't changed their model, unfortunately.
Yeah. I just wonder why there's just not more talk about that. It seems like that's a practical solution. I know there's lots of other technology as well that's being developed that could truly take us to a renewable energy society, but we're just not ready for it yet.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think nuclear is good to single out because it's the only thing that's proven and that's reliable and that's scalable. We have hydro for electricity.
Yeah.
But it doesn't scale. It can't exist everywhere in the world. You need places where you have rivers and you can have dams and that kind of thing. So, nuclear should be singled out, and it's very revealing that the anti-fossil fuel movement has largely been an anti-nuclear movement, and I think it shows that it's not really about CO2, and I think I talk about in my book, Fossil Future, there's a deeper view that industry is bad, that energy is bad, and really that human impact on the planet is bad. And I think that's what's driving the leaders in the movement. They think it's bad for us to impact the planet, including the climate, and the energy, CO2 from fossil fuels is just a convenient thing to focus on.
Seems like it. Alex, appreciate you joining us. The book, I've read it. What I've read so far is excellent, and appreciate you staying on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're coming right back in the Element Wealth Studios.